Wait a second. This isn't your grandma's cancer show.
Not your grandma's cancer show.
Hi, this is Not Your Grandma's Cancer Show. I'm Tatum, and today it's all about causes and cures. And there's so much information out there, isn't there, that tells us why we get cancer and what we might be able to do to make it go away or make it not come back again. And with all that information, it's really hard to find out how to know the difference between the science and the snake oil. And so I have two amazing guests here with me today to help figure that out. I have Professor Gerard Evans joining us, and he's been working in cancer, the study of cancer, since the late 70s. So, yeah, knows a thing or two.
No imagination.
And we've got Kynwyn Giles as well, one of the co-founders of Shine Cancer Support.
Hi.
And what would you say, Kynwyn, happens to a lot of people who are told that their cancer is started by, we'll say, childhood trauma or what they ate? Like, what is the effect that happens?
That has on people. I think it's really interesting. I mean, we work with like thousands of younger adults with cancer, and I think probably everybody gets that at some point. You know, either told, oh, were you really stressed when you were diagnosed with cancer? Because that's probably why you got it. Or once they're in treatment, someone will say, oh, you know, have you tried apricot kernels? Because I've heard that that's going to cure your cancer. I know when I was in treatment and I had stage 4 non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and I had to do really high-dose chemotherapy. I remember somebody emailing my mom and saying, oh, I've got some great herbal remedy that will prevent your daughter from losing her hair. And then thinking, how is that even possible, first of all? And then also, like, if I'm that sick, maybe the hair needs to go, you know? Like, you don't want to mess around. So, yeah, but there's just so much stuff out there. And I think the internet, I mean, I sound like really old, but the internet is making it worse because there's so much stuff that can look legit when it's not.
Mm-hmm. And I know that I got sent videos of, that Big Pharma was basically hiding the cure for cancer, and that all the treatments I was doing was actually a waste. So I wanted to ask you, Professor Evans, has anyone ever told you that your work is a waste of time and the cure is already out there and it's just being held from us?
Nobody's ever told me, but I've certainly heard of this sort of thing. And I sort of wake up in the morning waiting for the phone call to join this conspiracy. I've never had one. And nobody I know has ever had one. I think people misunderstand what's going on in cancer research. They think that it's just a sort of engineering project, that we know everything that's going on and we just have to sort of apply ourselves and then we can fix it. We're not at that stage yet. These things are too complicated for us to understand at the moment. And so we know from a huge community around the world that it's impossible to understand the basic mechanisms of cancer and implement cures for an awful lot of them at the moment. What we've seen, though, in the last 10 years is tremendous revolution in new treatments and new therapies based on understanding how cancers work. So it's understanding how cancers work that is the problem at the moment, that is the block in the system. And that hasn't been solved by any pharmaceutical company. It hasn't been solved by anybody. And if I could solve it, I'd be incredibly rich. So I'd probably give it all the money back to the community, but it hasn't happened yet. So
in the absence of that knowledge, I think a lot of people have filled that space with putting, the causes of cancer down to things like emotional trauma. So a lot of people think that maybe, they went through a lot in their childhood, that had an effect on their bodies. And, people will talk a lot about dis-ease, that festers, and then later in life you get cancer. What would you say to someone who's been told something like that?
Well, I'd say that even if some of that did contribute, and there's no mechanistic way that I could see how it would, but even if it did, it's a bit like saying you've got a 10-year-old who's going to fill the bath up and make it overflow. So he puts bucket after bucket after bucket in, and then the last bucket makes it overflow. Which is the critical bucket? Well, there isn't one. Okay, we blame the last bucket. That's when he gets told off or she gets told off. But it doesn't work like that. It's all of these things in combination. And most of these things you can't control. And there's also evidence that things that happen to you that are tough actually strengthen you in some way. So I don't know. I don't think there's any plausible mechanistic connection between any of these different things. But human beings like to find causes for things, particularly in a way that can't be tested. So I don't see that there's any reason for people to feel in any way that they can attribute their disease to any single thing or even any group of things.
I think, when you receive that diagnosis, you lose an essential element of control of your life.
Yes.
You now no longer know, you're thrown into this whole new landscape, this whole new way of being. This physical body is often very changed by the experience. And Kynwyn, would you say that a lot of people from that really want to fill that space and get some element of control back by attaching?
Of course, and I think, for the people that we support, so people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s as well, I think they have, you don't realize you have a sense of invincibility until that sense of invincibility is gone. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you're going, oh my God, I didn't realize that, you didn't know that you felt that way until you don't feel that way anymore. And I think, the stuff that you can read about emotional trauma or stress or certain types of food or whatever, which can help cure your cancer or were the reason that you got it in the first place so you can stop doing them, that gives you a sense of control. It might not be real, but when everything else is out of control, then that's a totally reasonable response.
You can at least do something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah. And as long as it's, a lot of times, you think, well, it's not going to hurt me. So obviously there are cases, there's an example we use at Shine where people have actually given themselves cyanide poisoning by taking too many apricot kernels. So you can hurt yourself. But yeah, it makes complete sense that people would do it. I myself have gone down that rabbit hole occasionally.
What have you done? What have you thought your cancer was caused by or thought might cure it?
I think, I've wondered, I was under a huge amount of stress when I developed cancer when I was pregnant, right? So then I thought, well, was it the pregnancy? Was I stressed when I was pregnant? I used to travel a lot for work, so was I exposed to all kinds of chemicals when I lived in Vietnam, right? So there you go. There's Agent Orange. Is that what gave it to me? All kinds of things. And then I was telling you earlier, at one point was really into omegas 3 and 6 and 9, and I went and bought this really expensive it was like an olive oil that was infused with omegas 3, 6, and 9s, and then got home and looked up, I think it was omega 6s, which can actually give you like heart disease and high blood pressure and stroke. So, and I was like, okay, I'm curing my cancer, but I'm going to give myself a stroke. It's a real minefield.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Vietnam, because I remember about 3 a.m. in the morning, right at the beginning, I blamed Florida for mine, because I'd lived in Florida for 5 years, and I figured something in Florida caused it. Because I do think there's a little bit of magical thinking that happens around cancer and our survival to get through it. So sort of bringing it back to the science, like as a scientist, how do you view stories of radical remission?
Well, I'm a scientist, so I'm open to anything. If something can be shown to be true, then the only difference between me and a non-scientist is I reserve the right to try and work out how it happened. So I'm not blinkered. I don't think we're all blinkered in some ways, but I'm not blinkered in any way. As a scientist, I thrive on weird stuff and stuff I can't explain, but I want to find an explanation for it. So there are obviously documented instances of remission of certain cancer, spontaneous remission. And in fact, recently in a few diseases like terminal melanoma, by this tweak of manipulating the body's own immune system, we have actually been able to induce in patients remission, not spontaneous, because we know what we're doing, but it has induced a complete remission of these of the disease in these patients, and they've gone on to be cured when every other therapy was not working anymore. So clearly it can happen in certain cancers in certain circumstances. And if it can happen in some, then maybe it can happen in others. I'd like to try and find out how that worked. And then, of course, we want to work out how to initiate it effectively every time. And we can get away from, at least in principle, get away from these other therapies that we have now, which are, many of them are 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. They were discovered really in the Second World War as toxic agents, which were then used for chemotherapy. We don't want to do that to human beings anymore. We want to give them something that makes the cancer go away without making them feel sick or ill or their hair fall out or anything else like that.
Which brings me to, I think, this quite entrenched point of view of like Big Pharma having so much invested in chemotherapy that they're not going to let us do anything else.
Nobody makes money out of chemotherapy. The drugs have been around for donkey's ages. The armamentarium for chemotherapy, with some variations in how the agents are deployed and administered and various other things. Most of these things have been around for 20, 30, 40 years. This isn't where pharma is going to make any money. They're going to make money available, and I don't want to get into the debate. Somebody has to pay for this stuff. I'd rather governments paid for it, but that's not going to happen. But where pharma's going to make money is these very, very new modalities, because all cancer patients want to be cured. They want to be cured, definitely cured, and they don't want to feel like trash when they're being treated and cured. And everybody wants this, not just patients, but everybody who knows anybody who has cancer. The rest of humanity wants this as well. And it's achievable, I believe.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Like turning that on its head, that actually, if they came out with all the very individualized immunotherapies, there would be more money in that than...
and then the idea will be how to make that as cheap as possible,
right,
so that it's accessible to everybody in the world, which is what we want.
And speaking of, I'd love to hear your take on... so one of the things that quite a few people are doing when they have cancer and when they're going often through treatment is this idea of starving the cancer. So some people will say that sugar feeds cancer, and so they will cut all sugar from their diet. Some people will go on such low calorie to just stay alive with the idea that the rest of the calories is actually fueling the cancer. What is your take on that?
Well, there is recent work definitely showing that in certain experimental conditions, and probably mainly in animal models, that if you starve certain types of cancer, not all cancers are the same, excuse me, but you starve certain types of cancer of a lot of sugar in the diet, that is actually a good thing. And I think everybody would accept the fact that cutting down sugar, that is not things that make sugar like starch and everything else, but cutting down pure sugars is absolutely a good thing. It's a good thing not only from suppressing cancers to some degree, but also heart disease and all the other things, obesity and diabetes and so on and so forth.
Refined sugars.
We're talking about, your refined sugars, or we're talking about, corn syrup, for example. In the US, for example, everything is sweetened with corn syrup, which is fructose, a type of sugar, which appears to be particularly bad because it short-circuits the control systems that balance how sugar is metabolized in the body. When you take a big sugar rush, the body, your liver in particular, just has to decide what to do with it. And so it produces, it activates all sorts of mechanisms to store that sugar as starch, glycogen actually, on the basis of this hormone insulin that's produced by these cells in the pancreas. It's a very interesting, complicated sort of coordination between all these different types of cell in the body. And it dumps that sugar into this storage space. But if you run out of storage space, you just sort of burn it, and then you convert it into fat. And fat we've evolved for fat to be our long-term storage through the ghastly winter months when Ugg the caveman was wandering around unable to find anything to forage and had to live off fat. We don't have to live off fat in what we fondly call the developed world. And so it just accumulates and accumulates. And we're in a range of diseases now that never existed throughout the evolution of human beings. And if we can cut that back, that's definitely good for everything, not just for cancer, but for heart disease, probably for Alzheimer's, and certainly for diabetes as well, and all the complications of diabetes.
Interesting. So we're thinking in terms of like very sugary things like cakes and biscuits and things that have had like sugars and syrups put in.
Right.
Are we talking about fruits or things that are naturally sugary?
Well, there's a big debate about that. So I was one of these people who thought fruit's good. Mm-hmm. So I started drinking, about 20 years ago, gallons of orange juice. Now, the problem is that the amount of fruit you have to eat in order to it'd be the equivalent of half a litre of orange juice. You'd have to eat, the world's supply of this room full of oranges type thing. So in actual fact, the sugar intake from natural fruit juices is huge. It's like Coca-Cola. So you shouldn't drink tons and tons of natural orange juice. And after having decided that it was very healthy for me, I now limit myself to a small glass a day. And I love it, of course, but I don't glug it, which I used to do. So everything in excess that has a lot of sugar in it, whether it be natural or, quote, unnatural, is the same. You shouldn't take in a lot of free sugar.
So what would you say to someone who is trying to cut down on sugar and then occasionally, I know a few of my friends who tried and then just like broke down when they had a biscuit, or broke down was the sugar in this bread, or was the sugar coating? Because in restaurants they often put sugar in with vegetables. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Weird. I had a friend of mine.
Caramelizes sometimes when they stir fry it or something like that.
At what point do you think, if someone's looking for kind of a way to go through this that doesn't sort of tip over into affecting their life?
Well, I think there's two things here. One is, what do you do if you have cancer and about your sugar intake? And I think cut it down. I think such as evidence as exists suggests that cutting down on sugar doesn't do any harm. Okay. If you're talking about people who don't have cancer and it's a lifestyle thing and they're at danger of obesity and diabetes and everything else, cutting down sugar as much as they can is probably enough. And also just cutting down generally on food. People eat tons. I'm of the generation where if a plate of food was put in front of me, it was your duty to eat it all.
Yes.
Okay. And I can't, I have to kick that habit and leave some. So as long as it's there, stuffing it away and go, I don't need it. My grandmother, she would, who was a large lady, a wonderful lady, a large lady, lived to 96, by the way. But she would always say if there was food left over, well, mustn't waste it. Chomp, 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 chomp. And you go, Grandma, you're turning it into fat. Yeah, it depends what you mean by waste. It would probably be better to, just to not eat it and keep it for tomorrow or something else like that. So I think just keeping the quantity of food down is very good. Keeping the quality of food up is very good. Fresh vegetables, not too much meat, chicken rather than beef. I love beef. I like chicken too. And trying to do your best to get rid of refined sugars, not eat biscuits and these other things except as a treat. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of chocolate in the evening, but gobbling the whole bar is the problem.
So a little bit is not going to, if somebody's sitting there and they do have a little bit, it's not literally going in and feeding it and causing it to grow.
There's no roster up there. It says all cross for today, bad, anything like that. Nobody's judging you but yourself. All right. And whatever you do, it cannot stop cancers from occurring because a lot of it's dictated by random chance. Okay. And that's the problem that we have. We can't predict who will and who won't get cancer, who will and who won't relapse. We've got sort of guidelines, but it's always a judgment based on looking at the patient, looking at the individual disease. And people want certainty. And of course they want certainty. And we need to be able to provide them with some certainty. The certainty they want is, here's a tablet, it will make your cancer go away. That's the only certainty that will do.
Yeah. And in the
or don't eat sugar and you won't get cancer, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
I saw somebody shared something online that said, I've cut out sugar and I feel so good knowing I'll never get cancer. And I was like, oh, really?
Yeah.
And that's a certainty they want.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard it in yoga classes, do this and you're not going to get heart disease or cancer. And I'm sitting there like, really? Because I was a yoga teacher and who got it, And,
I mean, some things you can do. Don't smoke. That's a very sensible idea. I mean, smoking's responsible for a huge amount of cancers, not just lung cancer, but all sorts of other cancers as well. So if you stop that, that's definitely a good thing. I mean, I don't think anybody has any dispute about that. A lot of these other things, it's still not proven. It's still not clear. And it's still not clear how easy it is to implement these changes in diet and everything else anyway.
So our approach to our health, because there's a lot that really puts an emphasis on mindset.
Yeah.
Whether it be in adverts, whether it be in films, it's a kind of our popular culture is a lot about, you've got to fight, you've got to be positive, you've got to, battle through it. And, people who are considered to have a reason to live as opposed to do better. And so there's a lot that's put on mindset. Would you say that mindset can make a difference to our cancer?
When you're the expert here.
Oh, God. Well, I don't know the biology of it.
No, not the biology,
yeah.
but there are two things here. One is the biology. I can talk about that. But how you feel during the whole process and the mindset that you have to have in order to, keep going and not become depressed and, the quality of your life while you have this disease, I think,
Well, I remember my hematologist, because I spent 6 months in the hospital and had a lot of people telling me I needed a PMA, positive mental attitude. And I remember him saying, it will make a difference to your quality of life. It will not make a difference to whether the treatment works. Right. And actually, for me, that was hugely valuable because I had been sitting there beating myself up thinking, well, I don't feel particularly positive, actually. I've just had a baby. I got stage 4 cancer. I'm stuck in the hospital. That's not a positive experience. No. And so I think it helps. And I think if you can do it, like my doctor said, it does help your quality of life. Obviously, if you can learn to appreciate the things that you do have while you're going through a terrible time. And often, we work with people who, cancer does kind of clarify in a way. Facing any sort of life-threatening illness, I think, clarifies what's really important to you. Hopefully that you have good people around you. I remember thinking, well, actually, I don't have many regrets. I was happy with the things I'd done in my life. Not that I'd never made mistakes, but it was all, pretty kind of going in the same path. But what I see sometimes is it's that guilt of not feeling positive, right? And then it's counter, it's not useful. And actually, I think there is something quite powerful also about admitting, like, this isn't a very happy, positive experience to have. It's not something you would wish on your worst enemy.
Well, yeah, so. I mean, definitely. I've been stressed about being stressed.
Yes, yeah.
And then felt really negative about being negative. And, you can just get in these loops and then you think, oh, my God, what am I doing to myself?
But it victimizes people. It's not just the patient herself or himself. It's also what everybody else in the family and the friends think. I mean, if you succumb to cancer, and are you really going to say it was partly the patient's fault for not fighting it, whatever that means? That's rubbish. I mean, it's appalling. And in fact, the language we speak about cancers, even amongst my peers, or, cancer cells are clever, they outwit the therapies and everything. This is all rubbish. It's bad biology, but it's awful for patients because it depicts having cancer as some sort of existential battle between good and evil, which, if they succumb, they ultimately fail in that battle. This is just rubbish. It's not how it is at all. Everybody wants to live. Everybody wants to fight this disease. And what we've got to do is help them, but help them with physical things that actually make a difference. And then their mindset will be, if I came to you in 40 years' time and you, God forbid, had a diagnosis of cancer, and I could say to you, oh, well, because of the advances in cellular molecular biology and cancer medicine, just take this pill. I don't need to know where it is, who it is, what the symptoms are. It'll make the cancer go away. I bet you your mindset will be pretty good. That's what we need.
It's really interesting about mindset that you brought up is the family, because I've spoken to a lot of people who you can feel actually a little bit of anger and betrayal that their partner has left them. And they will say things like, well, they gave up. And, you know, from a biological point of view, if cancer's really advanced, would giving up, I mean, you know, obviously I'm using air quotes here, would that make you die?
No. I mean, it's got very little to do with it. It might affect your quality of life and your feeling about your impending departure, but it's not going to change anything. I mean, your brain doesn't have very much control over the somatic cells in the body, the cells that make up the tissues of your body. And there are mutations driving cancers, and your brain's not going to be able to fix those mutations, and it's not going to be able to necessarily fix those cells. What it can do is change the way that you approach, you know, what is going to happen. But I think this is true. I mean, my parents died when I was very young. Okay, I was 7 when my mum died and 15 when my dad died. Do I remember feeling anger? Well, not when my mum died. She died of an asthma attack. But I did when my dad died, because he'd left me, you know, and of course that. But the important thing is I was given help and support, and very quickly realised that it wasn't anything to do with him or me. This is just a natural feeling that you have when somebody you really care about and love disappears. And your brain just responds in a very reflex way. It's less interested in why they disappear and more interested in the fact that they have disappeared. And you have to learn the difference. Yeah,
I think absolutely there's those stages of grief. Yeah. I think what happens when people start to attribute properties to cancer prevention or curing is then it becomes very personal, and then it's like almost they've attributed not just that they died and they left, but that they didn't do something to stay.
But it's interesting that you say that even as a scientist, you guys use language sort of like the cells are outwitting the therapies and that kind of thing. So it does. It's like everything's got a brain and it's trying to.
Yeah. So the biggest problem in teaching biology, and you know, I work in a university, I teach undergraduates. The biggest hurdle we have to overcome is to take the intent and purpose out of what we see in biology. So there isn't a brain inside a cell making it good or bad. That's something that humans have because they've got so many cells all interacting. And what emerges from that is the sense of self and purpose and various other things. And indeed, it exists. But not everything has a little gremlin inside, you know, pushing levers and buttons and cackling type thing. You know, it doesn't work like that. Our bodies are remarkable examples of self-organizing systems which control each other by contacting each other. Is more like an economy, for example. And there isn't a direction going on there. The only direction you have is what you can impose upon it. And this is what's happening when somebody dies and you're left alone. You impose upon this thing that didn't have any intent about it some mechanism for why it happened. And it's called blame. And we live in a society now that thinks you can solve problems by blaming people. That doesn't solve the problem. And it doesn't solve cancer.
Yeah. That's I just wanted to take that in. Because I think a lot of us walk around with guilt and blame and kind of this feeling that maybe if we untangled it, maybe we could. So
searching for the why, I think. Yeah. I personally have spent, hours and hours thinking, oh, did I do this wrong or should I have done something else? It would be, I'm taking over now. I would love to know what you think then is the cause. So somebody who is a yoga instructor or a vegetarian or, they've lived a relatively normal, healthy life and they're 30 and they get cancer. Why?
So have you ever played Monopoly, the game?
Of course.
Have you ever thrown a double six?
Very rarely.
But you have thrown double six. Did you immediately stop and think, why? Who's to blame for that?
No. I
No.
thought, yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, because it's positive.
Yeah.
But if you needed a double one to win and you didn't get it, you go, like that. The fact is, it's a lot of randomness in life. A lot of things that are under nobody's control. Cancer is a disease that arises because of random errors that accumulate within the genetic material of individual cells. And you can increase the chances of that happening to some degree, but you can't control what the damage would be that happens. So, for example, if you decide to go to Chernobyl and hang out for years where there's background radiation is very, very high, it'll increase the chances that damage will happen to your DNA. But whether that damage leads to cancer is not anything that's under your control. It's just random. You've got 30,000 genes in your genome, and about 300 or 400 get damaged and can cause cancer, as long as they're damaged in a particular way, and you can't control that, and the radiation doesn't care either. I mean, I think one of the things that people might find difficult to deal with, but I actually find very comforting, is that actually the universe doesn't care. It's not making decisions about you or evil things happening to you because there's a malign influence going on. We are free in the universe, and the only thing that should care is us, and we should care about each other. And everything else just moves along in the universe and sails along. And I find that really rather comforting.
I find it a bit scary.
So,
But
so you can add to that. You can say that there is a purpose, and I have no problem with that, and believe in God or something else like that. But that doesn't mean to say that you'd blame God for your disease, okay?
no.
So me and my best friend used to say something that sounded really negative, but it was quite freeing to us, which was, and we were talking about relationships. Nothing means anything and anything means nothing. Mm-hmm. Which sounded really dark. It's like you could be with someone for 17 years and then have no idea that they have, another wife and a kid somewhere else. Yeah. You could be with someone for, a very short period of time, that everything is going great, and then one day it doesn't, or that they're kind of okay and then they turn out to be amazing. And in a way, it took a lot of the pressure off of trying to figure it all out and trying to drill down into something. There was kind of a release of control.
Yeah.
Or responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I guess what you're saying, these things are happening all of the time. And
right. And that you're more along for the ride. You're instead of trying to figure out, where someone's going to be 5 years from now, 10 years, and where am I going to be 5 years and 10 years from now, it's kind of like, where are we now?
I remember when there was this desiderata that everybody had when I was a kid that was, advice on how to behave and everything else like that. And I remember after my father died when I, was 15, 16, being very, very dark and depressed about it. And I remember reading it one time thinking, ugh. But it said something at the end. It said, you have a right to be here. And I thought that was a very magical thing. It didn't say what would happen to you while you were here, but you had a right to be here. And as you say, experience it and come along for the ride. And good things happen, bad things happen. And but it's endlessly interesting.
Yeah. And the desiderata that starts, I'm going to paraphrase probably badly, it's a prayer sort of saying, God, help me accept the things I cannot change and give me the strength to change the things I can and the knowledge to tell the difference between the two.
And they're exactly where we are.
Yeah. And I think that, for a lot of us with cancer, that, taking the God part out of the equation, that is what we struggle. What bits do we accept about what we're going through, and what bits do we try and change and adapt and do the right thing to help us out?
So what I would say is that not everybody wants to do this because everyone's got other important things to do. But what keeps me going is I want to try and fix this. No, I know I won't fix it. I know I won't find the cure for cancer, but anything I can do to add a little bit to it, and with my other colleagues around the world, there's lots of very dedicated people who just want to lick this disease, and make it a thing, just history.
So I have lots more questions to ask you about that, about what's going on, about these, how to know what the next steps are in cancer research, what is happening. We'll be right back with Gerard and Kynwyn. So we're back with Gerard and Kynwyn talking about causes and cures. And one of the things that's marketed, unofficially marketed as a cure for cancer is CBD oil. And I would love to know, like, how do we know when something says unofficially or under the radar that something is a cure? How can we tell if there's something to it or if it's snake oil?
Well, there are usually two signs, I guess. One is that the people who are proposing it tend to be rather vague about which particular types of cancer or disease this is good for. And because lots of different cancers have very fundamentally different mechanisms, it's very unlikely that not impossible, but very unlikely that you would end up with one thing that can be used to cure all of them. But the second, and speaking here as a scientist, what's the mechanism by which you would do that? So we understand a lot about the mechanisms that make different cancers in different patients. In what way would a cannabis oil impact upon that and block the process of cancer? How would that work? These things are not magic. The thing about biology, it's A goes to B goes to C. There's a lot going on at the same time, so it's complicated. But essentially, it's lots of things just communicating one signal from one place to another place and triggering various types of response. How would CBD oil interfere with that in such a constructive way? I can't see any mechanism that's plausible. And the people who are proponents of it don't ever promote a mechanism. So I would have said that is probably a sign that it's being over-pushed.
So things to look for are if something is saying that it helps all cancers. So if they're kind of vague, and if they're not saying this is working because of certain mechanisms.
Yeah, and the important point there is that if any drug, if anything's ever going to be used as a drug for patients, we need to understand how it works. There need to be clinical trials, safety needs to be assessed, efficacy needs to be assessed, so that it can be used for everybody. I mean, if CBD oil really was a generic anti-cancer drug, I'd like it to be out there in the world because it's pretty much dirt cheap, and we should be using it to cure millions of cancer patients all around the world. The other thing that always makes me suspicious is if the substance is either illicit or it's only available in a particular place in a foreign country. And again, Germany or wherever,
South America,
Mexico, various other things. It's often the way, and people, the sad thing is it plays on people's desperation. They think, my God, if I can just go somewhere suitably exotic or different, they will have something that no one else in the world has. The cancer community around the world is not close-knit because it's so huge, but communications across are enormous. It's very difficult to imagine that something can happen in some country somewhere that isn't interwoven with all of the other things that are happening everywhere else.
Interesting.
Would you say that's the same? I'm just thinking of, there's some online people who have quite large followings online who will say, well, I cured my cancer by eating a raw food diet. And so this is what all cancer patients should do. Would you apply the same kind of logic then? How is it that a raw food diet has helped your cancer or any other cancer? I suppose it's a good question.
Well, first of all, what's the evidence that the claim is true?
Yeah.
Okay, which is they've got what we call a number, an N of 1.
Yes.
Which is them, right? Okay, so even if it ever turned out to be true, which I'll come on to in a second, there's no evidence it would necessarily work for anyone else. I mean, but if it were true and it did work, then I'd be incredibly excited about it. We'd like to know how it worked. The fact is that there's no obvious mechanism by which it could possibly work. That doesn't mean to say I necessarily refute it, but I'd like to see more evidence put forward. And these things are not done on the basis of evidence. They're done on the basis of a sort of some apocryphal observation in one individual at one point in time. And that's not good enough.
And I think that's the evidence is also really tricky because a lot of those videos, that say, I switched to a vegan diet or a raw food diet, And when you dig deeper in the video, it's like, oh, we thought we had 3 months left to live, and this is how we did it. And when you actually Google them, you find out that they went through treatment.
Oh, they had surgery and chemo, but they turned down the radiation, and that's what saved them when they switched to the raw food diet. I know.
The amount of those claims, are from people that had, part of the treatment and then claimed, and maybe as a way to get in some control themselves. So, yeah, it is.
I think, I've got nothing against, I don't think any member of the cancer research community has anything against people putting forward bold claims. The point is that's not enough. Bold claims have to be backed up by observation and by fact. We need to look at all the data and everything else. I don't want to put a damper on some amazing thing that could happen. The sun in another galaxy might explode and send cosmic rays. I mean, who knows? I mean, you can invent anything you want. That's the problem. You can invent anything you want. Distilling it down to a reproducible treatment that works on many different people, that's much, much more difficult. And that's what's missing in a lot of these.
So there's how many different types of cancer?
Well, how many different types of cells do you have in your body? I mean, nobody really knows. I mean, there are the commonest types of cancer, which usually affect, at least in what we call adult cancers, not young adult cancers. The commonest cancers tend to be cancers of the surface lining of tissues called the epithelium. In younger people, they tend to be diseases of the blood and also of the bones and connective tissue. We suspect that the young person's cancers have got more to do with developmental programs that have gone wrong, because if you imagine you start from a single fertilized egg and then you have to build all the different cell types and everything has to work out where it is relative to everything else. And if that goes wrong, you can get overproduction of cells in one particular place or organ. And those are developmental problems. The brake didn't work to shut things down. And they seem to be the sort of diseases that children and young adults tend to get, a different spectrum. In older people, most of the cancers are either blood cancers or, as I say, the cancers of the epithelial tissue, and they arise in all the different organs of the body. The commonest is still lung cancer. That is an example of something that was self-induced, but let's be careful here. People didn't realize that it was so deadly and so dangerous for a long time. So you can't go back and say all those people in the 50s and 60s who smoked really heavily should have known better, because they didn't know better. It was even advised in those times that doctors should smoke to calm themselves down. So now we know better.
And were you telling me, Kynwyn, that some of the original research on stress and cancer was actually funded by the tobacco industry?
Yeah. So that was one of the talks at Shine Connect a couple of years ago. We had a professor from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine who had done research in the tobacco archives in the US. And they'd found that some of the researchers who were proposing this link were funded by the tobacco industry. And the argument was basically not that smoking gives you cancer, it's that you're stressed. So you started smoking and it was the stress that gave you cancer.
Right.
I think he's published some papers on that as well. So it's really interesting how that sort of thing gets into the general consciousness. I think it's Hans Selye was the guy who, the psychologist who was looking at stress, who sort of discredited.
But going back to our earlier point, where you need a mechanism, we know what the mechanism by which smoking causes lung cancer. We understand the chemicals and the mutagens that damage DNA, the irritants within the smoke and the tar and various other things. We know if you use those chemicals and apply them to cells, they will cause mutations in cells. So this isn't just something that it's not like cannabis oil or something else like that where there's some weirdo connection here. We actually know what the physical connections are and why smoking causes cancer. What we don't know is whether it will cause cancer in one individual but not in another.
And so in terms of, like, we were talking about kind of younger people's cancer and the developmental differences, how does that play into having genes that predispose us to cancer?
Well, now I've got to speak as a as an evolutionary biologist here, one has to remember that evolution works on organisms moving their genes on. That's where selection works. So anything that happens in your life after you've moved your genes on is pretty much irrelevant. Now, most adult cancers occur in the post-reproductive phase of life, and therefore there's probably not a good reason why they happen or why they don't happen. Whether people over reproductive age died of cancer or something else, or didn't die, didn't make an awful lot of difference to selection and evolution. In young people, where do these cancers come from, and wouldn't evolution have selected against them? Well, of course, the number is not very high. And the guess that we have is that the processes that are needed to build a complicated human being with all the wonder and the organs and everything working and everything else are sort of on a knife edge, which is they're very beautiful and they're very tightly poised once against another, but that means they are susceptible to a bit of a train wreck on occasions, and some combinations of the genes you inherit may predispose you to a train wreck, which means that one cell within one tissue that should have shut down when you reach the age of 20 didn't shut down when you reached the age of 20, and it kept on proliferating. And that has something to do with a whole basket of genes that you grew up with. But you could take another person with the same basket of genes and it wouldn't necessarily happen. So the idea is that cancers arise not because they're ghastly diseases with mean spirits inside them, but they are aberrations of normal processes within the body. And I think that's actually generally a very important principle. Which is why also when cancers grow, it's not just the cancer cells that form the cancer. There's integration with all sorts of other tissues within the body, the inflammatory cells and the immune cells and the blood vessels and various things. The whole thing is a highly coordinated structure. It's just aberrant. It shouldn't be there. But this coordination is still there. So that's telling us that this is some hacked version of normal process, an aberrantly hacked version of a normal process.
So do all cancers, once they become aberrant, do they all behave in the same way?
No. And they all, and actually that's one of the questions I ask my undergraduates, which is, why is cancer deadly? And they all put their hands up, and then I go, yeah, and they go, well, is it because, and suddenly instead of telling me, they're asking me questions. So some cancers spread around the body, metastasize, and they disturb and corrupt the functions of the other tissues within the body, and that's how they're deadly. Then other cancers spread locally, like a lot of brain cancers. They don't spread around the body, but they spread into the brain, and they're just as deadly. And then there are other cancers that kill you for different reasons. For example, cancers of the cells that make insulin overproduce insulin, and basically, that has a hormonal effect on you and can be really quite deadly. So different cancers kill for different reasons, and they behave in different ways. And cancer isn't just cancer. Cancer as a disease that kills you is derived from an aberrant hacked disease, a disease that doesn't kill you. If you sliced open a 60-year-old human being, they'd be full of lumps and bumps all over the place. These are basically little cancers that failed because we have these defense mechanisms that shut down cancers. We are defended against cancers, but these defense mechanisms activate and the cancer is shut down, and we end up with a little lump or a wart or anything else like that, full of these things. It's just that very occasionally one breaks through the other side and then forms a malignant disease. And it's still incredibly rare. There's 100,000 billion cells in a human being. That's a 1 with 14 zeros after it.
It's hard to get your head around that number.
So to give you an idea, it's the same as the number of stars in 1,000 galaxies the size of the Milky Way.
What?
Right, and that's just in you. And cancers arise from a single cell. So 1 out of 100,000 billion cells picks up these mutations. The amazing thing is it happens so rarely. In fact, for us, the curiosity is not that cancer is common. It's common because we contain so many cells that could become cancer cells. The remarkable thing is how rare it is. And yet, even though cancers are rare, every time you cut your finger, you can rebuild the tissue very quickly. So cancer is a disease where the rebuilding program isn't just there, and it's not there in normal patients. It's actually doing the right thing, but in the wrong place at the wrong time. So cancers are diseases of context, where the context that a cell normally uses to regulate where it is and how it's going to behave is lost or damaged or derailed in some way. Cancer their disease is a molecular information, and where information goes awry.
So, in terms of the future of how we deal with cancers, is some of it around basically retraining them at their job?
So that's an area that we're very interested in at the moment. So the idea goes like this. Where does the peculiar look of different cancers come from? If you look at a cancer in the pancreas, it has a very signature set of characteristics. It's very dense with lots of connective tissue. If you look at cancer in the lung, adenocarcinoma of the lung, it's very inflammatory and open and lots of immune cells whizzing around. These two cancers look very different from each other. Why do they look different from each other? Not only do they look different from each other, but actually most cancers in the pancreas look the same as each other. So cancers of the pancreas look like each other, but they look different from cancers of the lung. I mean, where does this come from? Okay. Well, the obvious place it comes from, and these are now most recent data, is it comes because actually when you damage a pancreas and repair it, the program you need to repair a pancreas is different from the program you need to repair a lung. And the cancers take on the characteristics of that repair program. So it's a normal process, it just can't stop. And it can't stop because instead of being signaled by damage, it's being driven by these mutations in your DNA, in the engines that drive the regenerative program. So that explains why cancers of a particular tissue tend to look like each other. Even though they may have different mutations, it's because the mutations have hacked into an underlying program. Now you follow that through and you say, well, what happens after if you damage a tissue? You rebuild it. And to rebuild it, you need to integrate lots of different cell types to come along and remodel the tissue and burrow and make blood vessels and various other things. But then when you've rebuilt the tissue, you need to put it back together again as it was before it was damaged, because it's highly abnormal. It's got blood vessels all over the place and weirdo stuff going on and immune cells coursing through it and everything. It's not quite a quiet, normal tissue. So in order to make it normal, you've got to resolve that injury and move the tissue back to normal. And very little is known about that resolution process, but we know it happens in all injuries to tissues. So what we've been wondering is whether the resolution process, or what that tells you is this complicated thing that looks like a cancer following a normal injury, can be resolved. You have the machinery to do it. If this is true, then even though cancers, which are the same process but driven by mutations, look incredibly complicated, you think, how could I ever put this stuff back in the string bag? It may well be that we have evolved programs that can do this. We just don't know how to activate them. So it's an interesting idea. The world is full of interesting ideas. But it does tell us that the complexity of cancers is somewhat illusory. That is, we know that they are complex, but that doesn't mean to say that you can't make them disappear by fairly simple groups of signals. And that's where we're interested at the moment. There are other views that every cancer is different and you have to develop a therapy around every different cancer. These two ideas are at opposite ends, but they're not colliding because they may both be alternative answers to the same thing. But I'm very, very optimistic about the treatment of cancer in the future. Not all cancers immediately, not at once, but I've confidently predicted that my children who are in their mid and late 20s, I don't think they'll be worrying about cancer when they're in their 70s or 80s.
Oh, wow.
That's only 50 years away then.
Yeah. 50 years is a long time.
Yeah.
But I think they'll have other things to worry about.
And so that's kind of where immunotherapies, do you think, are coming in then? That they'll help with that rebuilding process?
So we know now that if you take the handbrake off your immune system, it's a dangerous thing to do because your immune system is constantly on the lookout for foreign bugs and viruses and various other things. So you have to keep it active, but you have to keep a lid on it all the time. So it's constant dynamic tension. And as you know, in some diseases, the immune system can take over and you get autoimmune conditions and hay fever and everything else. But nonetheless, it's this tightly capped thing. It's like it's like it looks like nothing's happening, but if you push your fists against one another as hard as you can, you start to shake like that. That's the state the immune system is in, right? It's cap on it and go, cap on it and go. And it's a very delicate balance. And we know that if we take the handbrake off, the immune system becomes more active, and that in certain patients, in certain types of cancer, that can be used to attack their tumour. The issue is, what is the immune system actually seeing in the tumour? Because the tumour is made up of your cells. Is it seeing something foreign and different? Or is it actually part of this injury resolution program that actually takes damaged tissue and when it's been repaired, pushes the tissue back to its normal original state? We don't know. It's a big open question and a big discussion within the field, but very, very exciting. What cannot be denied is that immunotherapy is almost magical, and I use this word advisedly for a scientist. It's almost magical. It can take patients with certain types of cancer, only certain types of cancer at the moment, and who have failed all other therapies, and it can cure some of them, some of the time. And just the fact that it can cure some of them some of the time means it almost certainly can cure more of them more of the time if we understand more about how it works. But it is truly wonderful, and that's why we're all so fascinated by it.
Is that coming about also because now we can sequence someone's individual DNA and target it specifically to them? So instead of you have this type of cancer, there's this kind of treatment, that it's more, this is Kyne-Wynne-Giles's cancer, and we
Precision
can...
medicine.
Yeah, so in the future we're going to be very precise about what exactly that we're able to do in terms of...
There are two schools of thought. One is that this will, precision medicine will be rapid. It will eventually become cheap. It'll never be that cheap because obviously you have to design the therapy around the individual patient. But that is the way to cure cancers. The other is an idea that we've been following, which is underpinning most cancers are a limited number of common mechanisms. And the fact that cancers look different is a bit of an illusion. They look different because they arise in different places. But actually there are common mechanisms that drive them. And if you could make drugs against a common mechanism, maybe you'd have more impersonalized therapy. That is one type of therapy that worked against many cancers. We just don't know. We just don't know. And so both are being pursued very, very avidly, often by people who disagree vehemently with each other, which is good. Because, there isn't one right way of doing cancer research. There are lots of wrong ways of doing it, but there isn't a definite right way. You can't say the only way is to do it this way or that way. It's good that there's dialogue and disagreement and debate. And that drives us to look more closely at what's going on and work harder.
Well, I'm very glad that you're on the case.
Yeah, I am too.
Thank you. I mean, it's, we're all really willing for that breakthrough and for minds that are open and looking in all these crevices of, what was it, how many billions of cells?
100,000 billion.
100,000 billion.
And
is that like a trillion?
Is that
No, I feel like
that's
that's
100
more.
trillion.
100 trillion.
Yeah.
That makes my head hurt.
Right.
Yeah. That's an American trillion. It's peanuts in a British trillion. Lots more zeros, of course.
Because I heard a thing that if our cells were lined up, that they could circumnavigate the world like 3 times or 6 times or something.
I mean,
like when you start to think of...
Well, think of it. Every cell in your body has about a meter of DNA. So we're talking something like if you stitched the DNA of every cell in your body along in a strip, it will be basically 100,000 billion meters long. I can't remember how many kilometers that is, divided by 3, and that's the number of kilometers. I mean, it's a staggering amount of information, a staggering amount of genetic material.
And when you think about like how much information is on the internet that is useful and not useful, I don't know. It could maybe that could circumnavigate the world several
at least 3 times.
Yeah,
I would have thought. Yeah.
So if someone's listening to this and they are thinking, does this cause cancer? Can this help prevent cancer? I'm in treatment. Is this good for me, bad for me? Where can they go to get more information?
Well, I mean, there's a number of the cancer charities are a very, very good source of information. They're as unbiased as they can possibly be. And certainly they all run websites and that give you information. I mean, in this country we have this amazing National Health Service full of, wonderful doctors and nursing staff and other people who are just there to look after people who've got cancer. And assuming that one can get an appointment and various other sort of things, they're desperate to help and give good help. The problem is at the moment with the best will in the world and the best technology in the world, which is always improving, diagnosing cancer is not as straightforward. And some cancers, yes, but diagnosing an awful lot of cancers is not always easy. And most people who, I guess, think they've got cancer probably don't have it. It's the commonest thing that is the most likely. That's what the adage that GPs always use. But if you want to know more, the internet's a good place, but make sure you go to the right places. There's NHS England, there's the cancer charities in the USA, there's the American Cancer Society, and the National Institutes of Health. These are all good places, and other countries will have other good places. But look for something that has some level of a surety about it, that is made up of professionals and researchers who are really trying to work on the disease rather than trying to peddle their idea. That doesn't mean to say that all people peddling their idea are bad. I don't mean that at all. No. But, you're looking for information that you can rely on. Excuse me. And part of the time that you will reach a point where people don't know anymore. And that is unfortunately where we are with some areas of cancer biology and cancer research at the moment.
Yeah, and that's a tough place to be, right?
Yeah.
I've been there. I remember spending hours kind of searching the internet and kind of then questioning what I was doing. And I think I was looking for that one article out there that no one else had found that was going to tell me that X, Y, or Z was a cure, and it didn't exist. But for Shine, we also, obviously, we don't produce a lot of that information because other cancer charities do, but we always recommend the Cancer Research UK Science blog because they often... if there's something in the media, a strip of bacon is going to cause cancer or double your cancer risk, they will sort of break it down and look at the facts and explain, maybe actually doubling your cancer risk might take it from, half of 1% to 1 3/4 or something. And then there's also a charity called Sense About Science, which produces a lot of stuff, including, I think, a guide called I've Got Nothing to Lose by Trying It, which sort of looks at, if you're going to overdose on apricot kernels, what might actually happen. So it's pretty good to check out those as well.
And I should declare, not a conflict, but Cancer Research UK fund most of my research. So I have a lot to do with them, and I think their sites are actually very good in terms of, public information. They try hard, as do we all.
Yeah, well, I think that that's the thing, is you want to know where to get the information from and find out, if there's any damage, if you should be trying something or doing it to excess or, during treatment. These are all really important things to know. And I hope that we've assuaged some of those middle of the night, why did this happen? And maybe, it's kind of amazing that our body, for most of the time with the other trillions and trillions of cells, is actually doing a really good job.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
It's amazing that we're here.
Yeah. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And if you have thoughts about this episode or about future episodes that you would like to hear, you can contact us at Shine Cancer Support. You can email us. You can tweet us. Kynwyn, is there any other ways?
You can send us a message on Instagram at Shine Cancer Support. Twitter is at Shine Cancer Sup, because I think we ran out of space. Or you can email us at hi@shinecancersupport.org.
And if I could take this opportunity to thank Shine for all the work you do.
Oh, well, and thank you, Gerard, for all your support. It's great to have somebody so smart.
Tell my mum.
So till next time, see you later.